Good morning. Is this
Testing 1,
on? Hi, everybody. Welcome. We'll have some more people coming in, I'm sure, but thanks for taking space to be here at Bethel U this morning. My name is Kiera Jorgensen. I'm on the Bethel U team, and it's my privilege to introduce our speaker today. If you were at first service, you've already heard Pastor Mark Auney, who will be preaching for us again in the second service. But I just want to give a brief introduction related to Mark and just say a word about why our Bethel U team and the pastoral team extended an invitation for Mark to preach and teach with us today. Mark is a 1979 Augsburg University graduate, went on to serve with the International Lutheran Youth Encounter team in Papua New Guinea and New Zealand as a young adult right after that time, and that was really formative for you, Mark, right, in discerning a call to go on to Luther Seminary, where he graduated with his MDiv in 1986 and took his first call at United Church in Gilbert, Minnesota, where he served for 3 years. Then at that time transitioned over to Augustana Lutheran in West St. Paul, where Mark served from 1989 until 2021. So 35 years in pastoral ministry.
35 years at pastoral ministry, 32 years at Augustana. So
32.
I had 3 calls, 2 churches.
Yes. Mark has served the St. Paul Synod in many ways, serving on the candidacy committee for a decade. He served as an internship supervisor for 10 years. He was my internship supervisor. In fact, just a little story, when I came to my candidacy committee and I said, I didn't learn anything about money in seminary. I mean, we studied money in the scriptures, but I feel really ill-equipped to lead churches when it comes to finances. And my candidacy chair said, you should talk to Mark Auney and consider being an intern at Augustana. And I learned a lot from Mark in many ways, but that is part of why when our Bethel U team was talking about teaching, biblical teaching related to stewardship and sustaining the needs of the church and generosity, the church's generosity beyond the boundaries of the church, Mark came to mind right away for me, so we're so grateful he's here. Mark is currently serving on the LSS governing board, has 2 children, Stefan and Ingrid, and Janice is with us here today. Are you in the room, Janice? Might be grabbing some coffee. They are celebrating at this point 43 years of marriage and just welcomed a new grandson, Eldon, in the last year, so lots of really exciting changes in retired life for Mark. We're going to hopefully have some time for Q&A at the end, but really eager to hear Mark's words on mission and money, especially as we think about where we're at as a congregation and what's happening with our giving in this context and how we're responding to the needs of our community in what is a really tumultuous time. If you've been reading the news the last 2 days, things are changing all the time with regard to the landscape of money and generosity. So welcome, Mark. So glad you're here. Thanks for being here, everybody.
Thanks, Kiera. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for this community and for gathering in worship where your word and your community was present in love and grace and in power. Continue to bless and guide the leadership of Bethel Lutheran Church, Ben and Inger and all the staff, the leadership in the congregation and the whole community as they seek to do your will in this world and to follow where you lead them. Bless our time together this morning and hold us in your life-giving and precious care. For Jesus' sake, amen. So, thank you, Kiera. It's intimidating to have a PhD student as an internship in your congregation, but she, along with a whole bunch of other interns, were just fantastic, and I learned just as much as they did when I was an internship supervisor. I realize I have limited time here, so I just need to give you a little background about who I am and how I came to be involved in and passionate about stewardship and giving. I did my internship in Saginaw, Michigan, and my internship supervisor there sent Janice and I to a stewardship of life practicum, which was put on by the Lutheran Laymen's Association. Tells you how far back that is by the name, right? But it was an LCA organization of pastors and leadership that were intent on teaching pastors and lay leaders about giving and generosity. And so we went to this LLM weekend, and Janice and I, that was our first introduction to really understanding the role of a pastor in stewardship leadership in the congregation. And I remember they took an offering at this gathering. Now, I was making $500 a month as an intern back in 1984 and 85, and we had a couple $20 bills in our wallet, and they took an offering, and so we had to make a decision about what we were going to do. Well, we put them in, and it was a big deal for us to do that. And then my first church, and you need to hear about this too, was in Gilbert, Minnesota. We interviewed up there in February of '86. I was one of the first of my classmates to get a call of the class of '86. I was LCA. Herb Chilstrom was my bishop. I grew up in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, which is on the end of the Iron Range. It's not really a range town, but it's right on the edge of the range. And when we interviewed in Gilbert, it was in the middle of that deep, deep recession in the 1980s. Some of you maybe remember that. Now that's mining country, right? And it was an old Finnish congregation, United Lutheran Church. And the second time I interviewed up there, my wife said, "Where are you taking me?" And when we got into town, it was February. The snowbanks were 8 feet high. It's a range town that just looked desolate. I mean, it was really grim. And she grew up in Bloomington. She's a city girl. And when I went to the second interview, at the end of the interview, the chair of the call committee, who was also the local funeral director in town, he and his wife, they looked at me and said, "Your salary is going to be $15,000 a year." And then they said, "But we don't know if we can pay you." Now, my predecessor, he was the first pastor of United. It used to be part of a yoked parish, and they went independent. And back in the day, the LCA used to provide mission support so congregations could hire a pastor, and then they slowly weaned the congregation off that mission support, and the congregation had to independently pay for the pastor's salary. And that pastor and his wife used to have to do fundraisers in the congregation just to pay his salary. His wife would lead the fundraisers. My wife said to me, "I'm not going to do that." So what I learned in Gilbert, and I went 3 years up there, never went without a paycheck. Wasn't much of a paycheck. We finished in the black every year. We bought a new organ. We re-roofed the parsonage. We started giving benevolence to the synod. And that's when Janice and I started tithing on $15,000 a year. I remember the treasurer would just come to my house and rattle it looked like a personal check for $800 twice a month. And then we would write a check for $80. Because I figured, well, I'm the pastor. I need to give some leadership here. And what I learned there was that if you lead with generosity, people will follow. And for 3 years, I never went without a paycheck. I never had to do a fundraiser. The congregation did all these things. And it was a really, really powerful lesson to me. And then, because of some of that, I got called to this church in Augustana led by a pastor by the name of Gary Langness, who's kind of a legendary stewardship pastor. You can talk to Justin Stetz about that. Justin knows him. And Gary and I made a great partnership in terms of continuing that. And I learned so much from him and from Augustana as well. So this whole stewardship journey was a very personal one to begin with for me. And then learning how to translate that into pastoral leadership was key for me. And I learned that no matter where you are, what the financial conditions are, where people are at, people want to be generous, people want to give, but you need to ask them, right? So the presentation here is a presentation that I've actually done before, and it's actually geared for pastors. And I thought it would be interesting for you as a congregation to hear from my perspective and from the pastoral perspective of what goes into pastoral leadership, hence the title, or the question there, how does pastoral leadership be involved in money and the mission of the church? So let's get rolling here. So first, the definition of stewardship. It's literally putting ourselves into the offering plate. And the text from Romans 12, "I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice." The therefore there, that's a really important word because up to chapter 12, the Apostle Paul has been writing about how salvation happens by justification through grace and faith. And then in chapter 12, he takes a turn and he says, now, therefore, this is what you do. This is the response. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice. Stewardship is everything that we do after we say, I believe. It's that simple. My what do you call it? Faculty person, Kiara, that's my advisor, thank you. My advisor at Luther Seminary was Gerhard Forde, the great Luther scholar. And Gerhard Forde used to say something like this. He said, the question isn't what you have to do in regards to salvation. The question is, now that you don't have to do anything, what are you going to do? That's stewardship. Everything that we do after we say we believe. And money's a part of that. Is it okay for the church to talk about money? Well, Jesus did a lot. You heard two of the texts today, especially the one I added on. Thank you for being flexible with the reading. I panicked a little bit there when I sat down and looked at the bulletin. I thought, oh my gosh, my sermon's blown up here. So we have biblical grounds to talk about money. And I'm not going to say anything more about that, and it's pretty hard to dispute. So I figure if Jesus can talk about it, the church can too, right? Anybody know who Herb Miller is? He was an old church growth guy. He talks about 4 viewpoints. Some people insist that money is not important. Others say that money is the most important thing in life. Some suggest that money is important in the material lane of life, but not the spiritual lane. Jesus has a 4th view, Miller says. We think about how money impacts us at all points of life. Its use and misuse affects our relationship with God and our quality of life. And this sort of gets to the heart of what I think needs to happen for pastoral leadership. I believe money is a spiritual matter. And if I, as the pastor, am the spiritual leader of a congregation, I need to be engaged in that question with the community and in people's lives. Not in a legalistic way, not in a judgmental way, but if I'm the spiritual leader, then that's my role. That's part of my role as a preacher of the gospel. And that's what I did for 35 years. I believe that healthy stewardship practices in a congregation begin with the pastors. And that's part of what Inger and Ben and I have been talking about. They called me up and asked me for some help in having that conversation. And they've shared with me a little bit about what the culture here at Bethel Lutheran Church, and every congregation is different based on its DNA and its culture, right? And so, you know, pastors, when they come into a place, they have to figure that out. They have to listen. They have to understand what's happened in the past year. What's the tone? Can I talk about money? All those things. So when I talk to pastors about this, I say they need to be able to articulate your own personal stewardship journey like I just did a little bit ago. And my wife, Janice, who's sitting next to Andrew right there. Janice, can you just stand up a little bit? Or a lot. We did this together as a couple. She was with me every step of the way and sometimes pushing me in terms of that. And so you need to know what your own story is. And you need to be a role model, I believe, in terms of giving and stewardship. Some things I talk to young pastors who are learning to be pastors. How is money handled on Sunday morning? Who makes the deposit? What are the safeguards in place for how checks are written? All that stuff that speaks to fiduciary responsibility and transparency. If that is done well in a congregation and in a healthy way, it helps to promote generosity and giving in the congregation. And you know why? Because people trust the leadership. And if it's behind closed doors, if it's not communicated, all kinds of things like that, then people get suspicious. And I mean, you all could tell stories about organizations that have mishandled and misused money, and how does it make you feel? Not very good, right? So how is money handled in the church is an important question. I don't know what you do here, how you write checks, but I know at Augustana, there was a very, very high level of trust for the pastors to make decisions about how money was spent, how it was given away, in the decisions that we made, but it was a trust that was earned. And it was a transparent trust. When we had new member classes, we talked about giving. We told people who were joining the congregation, we expect you to participate in the financial generosity of this congregation. That's an expectation that we have when you join this church. And we'd make some jokes about it and laugh about it, but we told people who were joining that that's what we expected. We used to, we offered, I'm going to say this, please don't get mad at me, but we used to do Financial Peace University at Augustana. I'm not as, Dave Ramsey right now is sort of, I don't know what your feelings are about him, but find a financial class that you can offer as a congregation, particularly to young couples and to young members. That's an important thing. We did Financial Peace at Augustana. It actually worked. We had some young members of the congregation that actually led it. And I don't know if they're doing it anymore or whatnot, but we also included stewardship as a line item on our budget. Our line item, the stewardship budget at Augustana was something like $6,000 or $9,000 a year, maybe $10,000 a year, that we used in our stewardship programming and what we were going to do. If it's a line item in the budget, what does that tell you? It's important to the mission of the congregation. So that's what we did. You speak about God's abundance. You start small, you celebrate successes. You've got lots of successes here. Inger and Ben have been telling me about what's been going on here. And that's important to do that, to celebrate. I believe people want to be generous, committed Jesus followers, just want to be invited into a life of generosity and giving, because that's what the Holy Spirit does to us when we come to faith. The Holy Spirit changes our hearts. You thank people, then you thank them again, and then you thank them again. You write personal notes. You can't thank people enough. You thank people for a beautiful bell anthem on a Sunday morning. You say thank you to your staff. You say thank you to generous donors. I used to the Luther Seminary Story magazine. I remember one year, one edition every year has a list of all the donors who give to Luther Seminary. And as I was looking through it, I noticed some Augustana members in there. So you know what I did? I sat down and wrote them some personal notes and said, thank you for supporting Luther Seminary and for helping to make sure that the church continues to have pastors. Money wasn't going to Augustana. It was going to Luther Seminary. But I celebrated their generosity. And, God doesn't have a finite pie. The abundance of God is unending. And when you think if people are giving someplace else, they're not going to give to the church, that's not true. Because generous people give at lots of different places. And so you say thank you to all of that, no matter what. And at Augustana, I knew what people gave. That list that the financial secretary has. Now, I know that's not the practice here. But I felt, and Gary did too, that as pastors, we wanted to know what people gave on a yearly basis for a couple reasons. We wanted to know who the leaders were. We wanted to know if a giving pattern changed somehow in someone's life. I wanted to be alerted about that so I could call them up, particularly if their giving stopped or if it was reduced. Did you lose your job? Has there been a health crisis? Are you ticked off at something, like me? And if I don't know what people give, I can't respond pastorally to what those needs might be. And I want to know, as a leader, what people give, because I want those people in leadership positions in the congregation. Because those are the folks who get it. And I don't want to put Inger and Ben on the spot in that regard, but that's what we did at Augustana. Lots of churches do that. Lots of churches don't. But as the stewardship leader of the congregation, we felt it was really important. And we worked really, really hard not to let that ever get in the way of how we treated people, no matter where they were on that line item. And I think we did a pretty good job. I never felt like I was compromised by knowing what people give. In fact, it's kind of a joy, actually, when you see how generous people are and who they are. I mean, it's like, holy cow. How cool is that? Any questions, comments about that? Anything up to this point in time? Yeah.
Happy to run the mic too, so we can all hear you.
Don, the wallflower. I met Don on the way in. He's kind of shy.
Yeah. Well, I told him I'd throw tomatoes at him if we didn't like what he said. But I love what you said because I think I was very inspired by what you said. But I think the giving, I know we talk about all the finances, but we can always got to remember the other side of giving.
Correct.
The time, the talent,
Yep.
and then the resource.
Yep. Yeah.
So,
And 100% agree with you. Like I said, stewardship is everything we do after we say what we believe. So when Don was harassing me when he walked in the door this morning, he was being a good steward. And I told Edgar, I said, every congregation needs a Don, right? Someone who's going to say hi to everybody and anybody because you know he's glad you're there. Again, this is from a pastoral perspective. That first bullet, I think, it's at the top of my list. The relationships that you build as a pastoral leader will determine your effectiveness as a stewardship leader. I love people. I love being in relationship with people. It's the thing I miss the most about being retired. It was really hard to leave the community because of those pastor relationships. They're absolutely sacred, powerful relationships that you get to have as a parish pastor. And I worked really hard at those, so did Gary Langus. And because of those relationships, we were able to ask unabashedly for lots of different things and in lots of different ways. The middle book. How many of you have read Henri Nouwen's Spirituality of Fundraising? Yeah. I hate the title, but he's Catholic. You know, they talk about fundraising. But it's not fundraising, it's stewardship, it's generosity, but it is an amazing little book. And if you haven't read it, I would really encourage you to do it. I don't know, Henri Nouwen dates me a little bit. But there's lots of good stuff out there. Those are just a couple that are favorites of mine. I'm going to give you my top 10 stewardship things. 1, God is the owner. Genesis 1. God's the creator of all things. It's not me. And, it ties into a little bit of the first commandment, too. I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. Basically, every problem, every theological question, everything in the whole Bible really gets down to a first commandment sort of a thing. That was the problem with the rich young ruler. He said he followed the commandments, but he couldn't follow the first one because money was his God, right? And Martin Luther, in his explanation to the first commandment in the large catechism, which nobody ever reads, Luther said, that to which your heart clings to is in fact your God. When he writes his explanation to the first commandment. So God is the owner. Malachi 3:10, anybody know that text? God says, let me put me to the test. It's one of the only places in the Bible where God says you can test me, because you're not supposed to put God to the test according to the Old Testament. But in Malachi 3:10, it says, God says, put me to the test and see if I won't open up the windows of heaven and pour down and bring the full tithe into the household, and I will open up the windows of heaven and pour down a blessing upon you. That's one of the only places in the whole Bible where we're invited to put God to the test, and it has to do with giving. And when you put God first, everything else falls into the place. Again, that's first commandment stuff. I think people like and respect when the pastor speaks openly and honestly about money. Did I offend anybody here this morning? Don't answer answer if I did. Because money, as I said, is a deeply spiritual matter, and it is linked to the mission of the church. The mission of the church doesn't happen without financial support. Even the Apostle Paul took an offering. 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, two of the best chapters in the Bible. This offering, this appeal that he makes to support the saints in Jerusalem who are just poverty-stricken. Because remember, they're all Jews. And they've been kicked out of the synagogue. And so Paul writes this letter to the Corinthians, and he invites them to participate in this offering, this appeal, to help support the church. Pastoral care, again, that has to do with relationships. We passed the new hospital on the way into town. How new is it? Pardon me? 2003. Well, I guess it's not that new. It looks new. We hospital called every day at Augustana if someone was in the hospital. Now, sometimes depending on why they were there, that didn't happen. I went and saw the Jorgensens when their second baby was born, before she was an intern. And it was a difficult birth. But I showed up at the hospital early in the morning. And people never forget it when the pastor shows up. They never, never forget it. We would do pre-surgical visits. I'd show up at the hospital at 6 in the morning before someone would have surgery. And they'd go, "What are you doing here?" And I'd say, "What are you doing here?" And they never forget. Andrew, when we met, he met with us the last time, and I'd forgotten about it. He brought it up. I'd forgotten that I'd been there. But when you do stuff like that, and it's showing up at a ball game, showing up at the nursing home, showing up at a party, I mean, it can be any number of things as a pastor. And pastors are busy. It's a very, very hard job, and it takes a lot of time, particularly when you're not in the cities. I mean, I get that. You're down here in Northfield. Lots of folks go to the cities. It's a lot of work to drive up there. But that's what we did. And it made for really powerful, powerful relationships that created fertile ground for the mission and the ministry of the church, particularly as it related to giving, because, when the pastor's there in the hospital room and then they're asking for money, there's credibility there. And it matters. I believe that God will always provide for the mission of the church, without question. People want to know what to give as it relates to what you give. So we would talk from the pulpit what our gift was going to be. Particularly around stuff like Global Mission or Minnesota Food Share, those are the two big things we did at Augustana. I would always tell the congregation what my wife and I were going to be giving at Global Mission Sunday. We're going to give a gift of $1,000, and we invite you to join with us. If you can't do that, do 500. If you can't do that, do 250. If you can't do that, do 100. If you can't do that, do 50. If you can't do that, do 5. It doesn't matter. Just participate in the offering. But this is what we're going to do. And I never had anybody come up to me and say they were offended by that. They liked knowing what we were going to do, because then it helped them to understand what maybe they could do. Maybe they could stretch their gift a little bit. Oh, gee, Pastor, I was going to do that. I was thinking about doing this. Well, I better do more. And that's always good news, right? So, but you have to know your own story in order to do stuff like that. And again, the pastoral role is so, so important in terms of stewardship leadership. And then, again, I talked about this a little bit earlier, just having a culture of honesty and transparency. The only thing worse than sexual malfeasance in a congregation is financial malfeasance in a congregation. I know a church in the cities which will go unnamed, and the pastoral leadership was not good, and it set them back unbelievable because it wasn't done right. I believe a congregation should tithe at a minimum. Augustana, our number one congregational every year was to give 20% away of everything that came in. And that's what we did. And then we did a lot more beyond that too, because that didn't include what we did do with Global Mission. But if you're not at 10%, start at 5. And then go to 6. Whatever. It's a process. Our stewardship committee would start working in January, and we would have a campaign in place by May for the fall. And this was our formula. Constant and variable and recurring equals stewardship success. The things that we do every year. Leadership, we always had a biblically based theme. We planned and planned and planned. We did education and communication and involved these committees. The variables are every year a different theme, different stuff that you could do to help lift it up. Creative ideas, tactical ideas. I mean, the skit this morning, right? What a wonderful way to celebrate your generosity around Minnesota Food Share. That's stewardship. And then the things that we did throughout the year, preach a stewardship sermon whenever the text fits. And a key to that is to preach a stewardship sermon when you're not asking for money. Did I ask any of you for money this morning? No. But the text warranted a stewardship sermon. That's why I had to add the rich young ruler onto the lesson. I don't know what happened in my brain when I read what Inger sent me. It was apparently I really wanted to preach on the rich young ruler today. But there's a lot of pastors are afraid to do that because they don't want to offend people. They don't want to talk about money. Okay, I'll finish up here real quick. Maybe that's it. Yeah, that's my last one. Anyway, questions? Ooh, time flies.
Ring.
I just want to say one thing. I can feel the Spirit in this place. This is a lively congregation. I mean, I felt it as soon as I walked in the door. Really, I'm not just saying that. You can tell that there's wonderful things happening here, and it's exciting to be here for me. So, thank you.
Anybody who have a pressing question as our ringers come in, and otherwise we can certainly continue with the conversation. All right, thanks. Yes.
Hey, Mark. Great to have you here this morning. I was just going to say that given our current political situation, all the winds of change and the uncertainty, can you speak a little bit to the fear around finances and how that can kind of grip our hearts and pull us away from these missional, aspirational goals to be generous?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? Anybody check your 401ks this weekend? I didn't. I didn't want to do it. Janice and I were at the Capitol yesterday, and it was really a powerful thing. And, I mean, how do you combat fear? You combat fear with love, and with trust, and with faith. Faith, hope, and love. These three things abide. The greatest